A lot of motivational speakers have their quote stage story where they talk about that moment of suffering that they climbed through and it defined them. And here's 5 steps to that victory that you can apply to your life. And I get that and I do that. And the reason I'm telling you this is because I'm going to give you the highlights of my own rough passage, which I talk about here and there through all the episodes of With Love, Danielle, because lived experience. Speaking of living and experience, this is about how to have a living death. So I'm going to get into the dynamics of the masks of ego burning and the begging for relief and how we become truly more radiant, evolved, joyful people, more aware of who we really are. But this time, I'm getting even more metaphysical with how we heal. I'm going to talk a lot about working with elements and our connection to nature, and we get a little more esoteric than before. Let's do it. How to have a living death. Hello, my loves. We're going to talk about radiance, and you can't talk about radiance without talking about suffering, but then suffering leads back to radiance, so stay with me. Specifically, we're talking about the radiance behind the mask. All right, it's a big topic. I'm glad you're here. Radiance, I think, is the mother of spiritual topics because radiance is the result of a devotional life. And radiance is the gift that suffering brings. So to understand radiance, we have to look into the true purpose and the function of suffering. And my perspective is like the analysis itself of suffering requires some courage. At least it does for me. Because as much as I want to glow by the light of the divine, as much as I want to be radiant, I sometimes fear what's required of me in order to achieve that glow. This is my own paranoia. What suffering do I have to endure to know my divinity? Will the divine pile on more pain as a bigger wake-up call for me? Am I going to miss this? Am I going to press snooze on that divine wake-up call? That's the wrestle. That's the ego and the soul wrestling. And it reminds me of Alan Watts. I may have quoted him before, and he's one of my favorite philosophers, a Zen dude. His perspective on suffering was there will always be suffering. The trick is to not suffer over the suffering. That's right. So if we criticize ourselves for suffering, don't criticize yourself for suffering, no. Or if we slip into self-pity, understandable, then we're going to unnecessarily compound the suffering. We just pile it, the higher pile of suffering, right? If we resist the pain, then we delay the healing until we start meeting the pain with an open heart. And this loving embrace where we meet the pain, this is a form of alchemy. I really hope you hear this. The loving embrace of our pain alchemizes the pain. The honoring of the pain transforms the pain itself. And that is when the radiance begins to glimmer. Radiance, I know you know this, radiance is a result of living a heart-centered life. What's a heart-centered life? We offer up illusions and ignorances to be burned by the light of consciousness. We give it all upward to higher awareness. And then as those illusions disintegrate and dissolve, then we have more space within ourselves to embody and express God's source, the light. Radiance does not come without burning. And the truth is that fire that burns. And our facade is the wood. And we emerge from the fire aware of our divinity, radiant. So I got a story for you before we get deep into the lesson, the teaching of this. And I want to quote Leonard Cohen. This is the song Joan of Arc. It was deep into his fiery heart. He took the dust of Joan of Arc. And then she clearly understood if he was fire, then she must be wood. I saw her wince. I saw her cry. I saw the glory in her eye. Myself, I long for love and light, but must it come so cruel and oh so bright? I'm Leonard Cohen in this moment right now. That's how I feel. That's how I feel about Radiance. I am both Leonard Cohen and Joan of Arc. So I was in Santa Fe, New Mexico. I was at a learning retreat with some indigenous leaders from two pueblos, the Taos and Jemez pueblos, hosted by my psychotherapist, Dan Davin. I know this is such a perfect New Age seeker situation, right? So I had my shrink to one side of me, and I had a medicine man on the other, whom I'd worked with before. Really incredible, powerful guy. And that was a beautiful situation because my quote unquote living death, as Anne called it, was just beginning. I had no idea how unhinged my ego and I were about to become. It was a intense year. I was in the middle of a super messed up, so messed up, highly painful / growthful romantic relationship. And the accumulation of years of stress and a few traumatizing events were pushing my brain chemistry and my hormones to the limits, which was priming me for the first panic attacks of my life. Those came after this part of the story. So one particular afternoon, I'm in the desert, Santa Fe, New Mexico. I'm coming out of a healing session with that medicine man. And I was undone. I was wobbly. Something had gotten uncorked. And I felt like, I really felt like the ground was splitting. I was destabilized. And when I got out of the session with the medicine man, Anne was there waiting for me. They're friends. So she was on the hacienda when I came out. And I looked at her and I just shook my head like as if to say, this is not good. And she walked up to me like a very calm paramedic, psychotherapist. She grabbed a towel and she said, I'm taking you down to the river. I'll never forget her saying that. And we walked silently. It wasn't far away. And we got to the river rocks. I got on my knees and I just sobbed and heaved. Anne placed her hand on my lower back and I just sobbed and heaved some more. And then at just the right time, she just laid the towel on a rock. She asked me if it was okay for her to leave. I said, yeah. And then she left me by myself. And I stripped down and I stepped into the cold, rushing stream. It's a big deal for me because I'm not a big fan of cold water. But I was up for anything. And I thought to myself, I am like wood right now. And life is the fire. And I am being burned alive. Burned alive takes on a very different meaning when you consider how radiance happens. And my personal sense of burning came from a profound feeling of annihilation. I felt like no one could touch my pain for me. It was inaccessible to everybody. Not my gifted psychotherapist could get to it, not the shaman, not my very best, super wise friends, not the man that I'd fallen in love with, not my glorious son who's, the pea in my pod. Not even Mother Nature could get to me, not my smaller self. I felt like petrified wood. You ever felt petrified wood? It's like rock, very heavy, very hardened, but it still knows that it's wood. And I learned that there is a type of pain, that depth of pain, that pain of annihilation, that you can only give to God. Can't put it anywhere else. So I'm in the river. The sky in New Mexico seems particularly vast when you are looking up at it from a river on your tiptoes. And I thought to myself, just give it to God. God is the fire. And that was the transmutational move. That was the radiance move. I loved myself enough in that moment. I had no choice. I love myself enough in that moment to hand my pain over to that which is greater than myself. I was really desperate. I let myself be aware of being worthy, quote unquote, worthy of having the load taken from me. Now, the rest of the details, the tears, the desert, the flight home, those don't matter. The story here is all about pure spirit from that point. I became aware, this was a long process, this was many months. I became aware of a burning light streaming into me for many months. I was very aware it was ravaging my ego. I was being torn apart. My opinions of myself were being toasted. All my life plans destructed. Some of them came back afterwards, but mostly I had to let everything go. And some days I felt I was being pulverized, or, as I said before, burned alive. There was a lot that ensued in that dark night, the dark night of blinding light. But to jump cut to the end of this, when I emerged, this is about a year-long process that I think was 3 years in the making. When I emerged, I was not the same personality. That burning, that passage left me very compassionate, much more gentle, a lot more joyous, and even more generous and aware of my capacity to love. I became aware that my capacity to love is vast. I had become, essentially, more radiant than I was before the burning. A more whole life. Suffering purifies us. And maybe even more so if we give in to that purification process, if we more willingly make the effort to get into alignment with the divine. The effort required is formidable. It is arduous. There's no way around this. It is life. It's hard work. To move into alignment with the divine, with our higher soul, higher self, we have to slough off the deceptions, the distortions, all those obstructions that are keeping us, impeding us from our wholeness, our ways of perceiving, relationships, habits, addictions. And this is what it means, that sloughing off, that intention to do that, is what it means to direct your life toward wholeness. This is what it means to live a life of integrity, capital integrity. And the shedding of those dense energies is truly a transmutational process. It's alchemy. It's alchemy at an elemental level, as in the elements of ground, water, fire, air, ether, the elements. We are made of those elements, and we are interconnected by those elements. So as we release ignorance and illusions, we're not just changing our lives, we're affecting our elemental composition. We shed the dense energies, transmutational. It's alchemy because we are made of the elements. We're affecting our elemental composition, meaning the elements within our being get transformed into light. And when that change occurs at that level, then streams, you can just feel this flowing into your being, streams of refined energy frequencies pour through us into our energy bodies. And this is what we call radiance. Here's a metaphor, just to really hit this out of the park. The wax of a candle and the flame. So the wax of the candle represents density and distortion, right? That heavy energy. And the wax is offering itself to be burned by the flame. Just take me, burn me, use me. That flame represents the light of truth. So the density is saying, use me up, dear light of truth, burn me. And that burning brings a glow to the entire room. So burning off your ignorance, our ego, and those limiters can be painful, but not only does it illuminate us, it illuminates the people and the space around us. Radiance starts as a tiny spark. It's just an inclination toward the heart. And then we can fan that spark into greater flames with every act of service, every loving choice. The flame, the light gets bigger and bigger. The light, the energies of the heart are magnetic. Love is magnetic. Love is the great multiplier. And this is the work very specifically of the age of Aquarius, by the way, the age of Aquarius that we are now into. Not deeply, it's just beginning. It's part of all the disruption that's happening on the planet. But the work of this time, this epoch, is to fan the flames of loving awareness and to grow the flames, that fire of loving awareness, into huge proportions, infinite proportions, so that light will benefit all of sentiency, all of life here. Let's talk about having fun with suffering and radiance. Step 1, the ego dissolves and makes way for higher light. So when the ego experiences deep crises, when its self-centeredness starts to break down, this helps to loosen the ego grip a little bit. The ego starts to lighten up. So the ego's dreams, its goals, the goal setting, it's myopic plans. And by myopic, I mean plans that only include itself. Those plans are going to fall apart, and the self-centered desires are then just going to unravel and just continue to dissolve. And then our heart-centered aspirations can then continue to move into forward position. The heart takes over as the ego dissolves. So step 2, as the ego falls apart, we let go of those silly goals. Then we begin to reflect the higher light. We reflect the higher light. When a cycle of lifetimes, also known as an incarnational transit, is ending, when a cycle of lifetimes is ending, and a cycle of lifetimes is 108 lives. So when that cycle, 108 lives, is ending, the higher self will do whatever is needed to get the attention of the ego by casting tremendous spiritual frequencies into that person's energy bodies. And this light, or the radiance, can be seen clearly in the aura of the person. And this light isn't self-generated by the ego reaching upwards for it. This radiance is a reflection of the divine. Boom, that's a throwdown for you. I'll just give you a really simple metaphor. I'm never short of metaphors. We clean our reflective surface so that we can mirror the light of Source. Our shining is God shining through us. So beautiful. All right, so let's get back to the dynamic of the higher self doing whatever is needed to get the attention of the ego by casting tremendous spiritual frequencies into their energy bodies, because this is intense. The soul is going to speak very loudly, if necessary, to get us to wake up. And that means that a particular life or lifetimes can prove to be heavier in terms of ego-shattering experiences. And since the ego is really self-centered in nature, and it only wants to live for itself and its individual desires, then that clinging, the ego grip, can be relentless. And then you know what's going to happen in that case. We're really going to get shaken up. Our higher self is going to talk even louder. It's as if the higher self starts blasting us with lessons in loss and humility. And that blasting is very literal, since the soul is electrical in nature. We are energetic, electrical beings. So from the point of view of the ego, those trials can seem relentless. The ego would be the last to think it was coming from our higher self to wake us up, because it's just one crisis after another. But the higher self is aiming to annihilate the lower selfish behavior so that we move into our true selves, our full selves. The soul is all inclusive. The soul wants to know what source wants and wants to be a conduit for that, not just what the little me wants and how to get that. As we have the radiance of the higher energy pouring into our individual energy bodies, then that me, I, me, desirousness is going to disintegrate. And along with those desires dissolving, our selfishness and our negative, constrictive thought forms are also going to melt. Again, you'll hear me say this for years to come. We're not setting out to banish the ego. We're setting out to heal it so that it can then live in our house and we can carry on with it. Everything gets included in the heart space. The ego, remember, that's our divisive nature. The ego loves bonds. It loves chains. It loves facades. So the ego is going to fight for its life. And that can turn our inner world into a battleground. And that battleground can create some intense periods of anxiety and angst. Anxiety and angst can often be our ego fighting to stay intact. But eventually, this is good news, eventually, a time comes when the ego is going to back off. It's going to lay down the fight. And it's actually going to allow in the higher frequencies. Lord have mercy. We get there. The reason the higher self is going to drown the lower bodies, that density in the ego, in light and radiance, is to get the attention of the ego, to force the ego to give up its facades and masks, to get us to the direct realization of no mask, God self. So, behind all the masks we wear, the binding identities, the restrictive ideals, all the roles we play in the outer world, behind all that stuff is our awareness of truth. Truth with a capital truth. The truth that we are sparks of the divine, reflecting back the glorious light of our origin. So we're not here to perpetuate the theater of day-to-day life. We are here to step out of the ego drama and into the free landscape of our true nature. This is it, our true nature. Living, breathing reflectors of God consciousness in all that we do. Radiant.
Life, death, thriving. Please make sure you're subscribed to all of my how-tos, and I will be back next week in episode 141 with a really simple, powerful prayer that you might want to have on repeat to be a protector of your own mental wellness and precious heart and that of others. So come back next Wednesday for the Shanti Deva prayer for times like these. Always, always, always with love, Danielle.
Thank you so much for listening, for feeling, for spreading the word. With love.